Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Right. So first of all, I'm Sarah. So I should...
Stefan.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Stefan.
I'm Colin.
I'm Colin. Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing. Fantastic singing. Thank you very much. You can actually sing too, which is
We've had lots of practice.
which is a great bonus. You won't want me joining in, I can tell you for that.
Yes, we do.
Right.
Right, so you know why we're here, then,
Yes.
presumably. The three demands bill.
Yes.
So,
Over to me. You'd like me to say what I think about it. Well, first of all, I'm very supportive of what you're saying about telling the truth and making sure that we're not just exporting our greenhouse gases to another country and not including that. So I think, and then including the effect of aviation. So I think absolutely let's make sure we look at the whole picture, and I hope that any future government will be much more honest about presenting the real data. Oh, sorry. I'm just conscious. I don't want to shout at people. I think the other point is about citizens' assemblies. Now, that's the one where I would hope to play perhaps the most effective role if I was re-elected. You might not know, but I was the first select committee chair to use a citizens' assembly, and I'm really passionate about the benefit that brought to our inquiry, to joint select committee inquiry on social care.
okay, I have a question about
Yeah.
that then. Will the Citizens' Assembly that you support
Yes.
have teeth, in other words, regulatory power?
The answer is it's very difficult because then you're devolving a parliamentary responsibility entirely. But I think what the citizens' assemblies do is they should shape the way that the policies are implemented, because I think we need to see climate justice when the way that this is rolled out. This is going to involve very significant changes in the way we live. And what we can't see is those changes just impacting people on low incomes,
No.
while wealthy people are able to carry on exactly as
agree.
before.
Well, you may not have noticed, but that's actually in the three
Yes.
in the three demands
So
bill.
climate justice.
Yes.
So I think that what citizens' assemblies do, and the citizens' assembly I worked with, I was profoundly impressed by the way it worked and the way you had a large group of people who came together for 2 successive weekends, residential weekends, and on the second weekend it coincided with one of the hottest days of the year, a royal wedding and a big sporting event, and they all still came. I was worried they wouldn't turn up for the second part of it, and I think that's because of the way they were all so engaged with the process and knew that what they were saying would make a difference, and I think
Yes.
that's the important thing. So they knew it was going to have an influence on what we eventually decided from all the list of options.
So my worry
yeah.
then with what you've just said is that if the Citizens' Assembly doesn't have regulatory power, that what needs to be done won't be done.
I think it can be done. I don't agree with you. I think that the point is whether or not it has there's a statutory responsibility to implement everything the Citizens'
But we
Assembly
know
does,
that
or whether it
politicians are always looking for the short-term gain and for the vote. So Citizens' Assemblies take away a little bit that necessity and can concentrate on these issues
Don't get me
without.
wrong, I'm not saying it shouldn't have a real influence and power, and when they're set up there has to be a clear understanding that the politicians are going to listen to what they say.
Right.
And take that into account. What I'm saying is that I don't think you can entirely devolve the full legislative responsibility to the Citizens' Assembly.
Would
I
it be
think
more
it
than it
has
is
to
at the
have
moment?
teeth.
Would it
Yes.
be more than advisory?
There has to be a genuine commitment that what is said will be reflected in the legislation.
Right.
But if you were to hand it over in its entirety with a statutory legally binding obligation, you might find that the Citizens' Assemblies came up with something that, for example, you as a government would then be implementing without agreeing with it at all. So I think there has to be a bit of give and take, but I think that the clear commitment must be to listen to what the Citizens' Assembly does and to make sure that it has a genuine role in shaping the legislation, is my view. And I think you can do that. And I think that had, for example, the Prime Minister been more willing to listen at the time to what came out of that citizens' assembly, I don't think we'd be in the mess we are now with social care, because there was huge willingness across political parties. We had over 100 MPs sign up to say that they would implement those that they would want it to have a cross-party
that's
approach.
great. That's great that you've got the experience in those kind of assemblies. But
Yeah.
what about the target for zero carbon?
Well, I think the target for zero carbon, if I'm going to be completely frank with you, I think that 2025 I don't think would be achievable. That's my personal view. I have to be clear about that.
So can I just
But I think what we do need to do is have a commitment to get the bulk of it out the way as quickly as possible. So we all know that the last 5 to 10% is going to be the most challenging. So my view is, rather than focus on an end date being what you have to do, focus on how much you can get done quickly. So how do you do the bulk of the decarbonisation before 2030 is my view.
So Richard Sims of the, do you know Richard Sims?
Well,
Of the Rapid Transition Network?
Right.
Yeah, said that the honest answer to 2025 is that we don't know until we try.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be aiming to do the maximum we can in the minimum amount of time. And that's what I'm worried about when we set a goal, which is 2045.
But the point is, you need to have interim goals as well. So my feeling is that everyone is focusing on having an end date, which, when the last 5% might not be achievable, people can pluck a figure out of the air. What I'm more interested in is having interim targets. So, for example, what the Liberal Democrats have committed to is to have 80% of our electricity generation from renewables by 2030, and to be bringing forward the date at which we have to go entirely to electric and hydrogen vehicles.
So these are the soft targets.
These are they're saying that these are practical things. So if by 2030 you can't be buying petrol and diesel cars anymore, that's actually quite a challenge to industry. We're not going to get there by 2025 because we've got to make sure there's a network of charging points everywhere. So we are going to commit to a 100 billion fund over the Parliament to make sure that we can roll this out. And for me, it's about rapid decarbonisation rather than arguing about the final end.
Yeah, that presupposes that we are going to continue with the kind of consumer culture that we have at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And what everybody, the scientists are saying, everybody is saying that we absolutely cannot continue with this consumer culture that we have at the moment. So what do the Liberal Democrats say about for example, going away from gross national product as a measure of progress and going towards something like gross national well-being or happiness or something like that?
As it happens, that is exactly what we have in our manifesto. At the heart of it is trying to move towards what's happened in New Zealand with Jacinda Ardern, where they've gone for a well-being budget. So everything that they spend their budget on has to have within it something that will contribute to a set of factors that will improve well-being. And one of the things I'm really pleased about in our manifesto is this cycling and walking, saying that 10% of our transport budget must go towards cycling and walking.
You're a cyclist.
So I'm a cyclist, and I've been banging on about cycling in Parliament for a very long time now. And one of the things that I'm proud that the all-party cycling group did was to push for it to be a cycling and walking investment strategy. But what was really disappointing was that the government didn't commit to the kind of upscaling we need. So for me, it's about practical action and looking at what works. So we know it didn't happen automatically, having cycling as the norm in for example, the Netherlands, across the Netherlands, and if you go to Copenhagen, in many of these European cities, it was a direct policy decision, and there's a few things you can learn on to how you can make that happen, and I think they're all there in the Lib Dem manifesto. So having that well-being approach to a budget, having a well-being economy, having a dedicated fund that you're saying it has to be 10% of the transport budget going to cycling and walking, I think that will be transformative.
I mean, I very much, I'm encouraged by what you're saying. I think that's definitely in the right direction. But if I look at your voting record, it is rather discouraging.
It is. It's not as good as I would like it to have been. I'm
So-
honest with you about that.
So, for example, when you
Yep.
voted in favour of a third runway at Heathrow Airport, I mean, what were you thinking?
What I was thinking was that you can, if there's going to be investment in a new runway, I think that I regret that vote. I'll be honest with you now. But my thinking at the time was that if we were going to have this infrastructure somewhere, it would be better that it could benefit the southwest. So that's my purpose, my view on it, was that it should be Heathrow rather than Gatwick. I think I'm very, very happy to have joined a party that has said we're going to not have any airport expansion. I think that is the right way to go. We now have declared a climate emergency, and I think all politicians have to be prepared to vote accordingly now that that's happened. You can't declare a climate emergency and then carry on as before.
Yeah.
So that's my commitment to you,
So
that
Sarah-
I would not be voting for any airport expansion, and Liberal Democrats would oppose that, just as they have said they will have an outright fracking ban and all those things. You have my assurance that I will be voting for and with Liberal Democrat policy. So I'd say please read it. I think it's a really encouraging document in terms of some of the practical measures to get us there to a decarbonised economy, but making sure that that happens with social justice as well.
So Sarah, could I introduce Ewan, who's
Yes.
the Youth
Hello,
XR?
Hi.
He's a first-time voter.
Yes?
He has a question for you.
Fire away, Ewan.
I've researched into your environmental voting record,
Yes.
and it's not the most impressive, I would say. And what I'd like to say is, having now moved from Conservative to Lib Dem, would you now change your voting record, or would you now be more environmentally friendly in your votes?
I can give you my absolute assurance that I will be voting as if it's because it is a climate emergency, we need to vote accordingly. So I will be voting with Lib Dem policy on the environment, and
So
I think you'd be happy with that to see
Previously,
it.
your votes were exclusively due to Tory whip, nothing to do with your own
Well, to be fair,
principles about the climate emergency.
the way that it works in politics is that you try and persuade from within as much as you can. I have a number of areas where I have rebelled. I've never regretted any of my rebellions. I have regretted many of the times that I voted in favour. But what I do know is that what you don't see behind the scenes with politicians is the work they try to do to pull a party in a different direction. And I know that over the past 9 years, I've been trying very hard to keep the Conservative Party pulled back towards the centre ground. My view is that the elastic can only stretch so thin, and I had to leave because I couldn't continue to support them. But I will be supporting the Lib Dems where I'm much more comfortable with their policies. So
Can we
thank
open
you.
it up to questions?
Yep.
Peter?
Peter.
Hiya. So I was wondering, in regard to the 2025 target,
Yes.
one of the main drawbacks for reaching that is the business plans of people like Shell and BP and the fashion industry. There's so many industries are looking to expand in a way that would make the net zero 2050 target even just complete fantasy. Do you have anything to say on that?
I do, and I think that if you look at, for example, the Select Committee report that was done on the impact of the fashion industry, people forget how much of this is causing a big change. I would say that the existential threat we have immediately is around the decision to leave the European Union and deregulation and the way that that will impact food miles. If we're going to move away from trading with our nearest neighbour, by definition you end up massively increasing food miles to places like Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, and I think that's it runs completely contrary to what you want to do, which is to have much more localised food production networks and local generation of your energy, all these kinds of things. And what is being suggested with us coming out of the European Union, I think is a huge threat. I think we're going to do much better to combat climate change if we work together with the European Union, rather than becoming an isolated little Britain at the mercy of Mr. Trump, frankly. So that's.
We're with you on that.
So I think that these are all important to take into account as well.
Nerina.
So,
There's one.
Yep.
There's
Oh, yeah.
just
Here
one
we
down
are.
first.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. Two questions.
Yes.
Firstly, you said you were not
prepared to go for zero carbon neutral by 2025, you said it's important to do most of it quickly. Are you prepared to do a commitment to 80% or 90% by 2025?
Well, what I should do is tell you what's in our manifesto. What we have said is that by 2030 we want it to be 80% of all our electricity from renewables and to have no more petrol and diesel cars, because we think that's achievable. If we can do it sooner, we will. So you'll see all the way through it saying that that's where we think we absolutely have to be. But if we, there's a sense of urgency to do this as quickly as we can.
Marion?
My question is about carbon sequestration.
Yes.
And one, how will you support farmers to
increase biodiversity,
work to increase the health of their soil? Because we know that's a really important place to sequester the carbon.
Right. Okay. I think there's a range of things we can do. This is, as you say, starting from soils, but also looking at it as an entire area. So for us, the main carbon sequestration sites are actually around our estuaries and the moorland. So what I'm very pleased to see recognised in the Liberal Democrat manifesto is not just the commitment to plant 60 million trees a year, but also to look at that wider piece around restoring our peatlands, for example, our wetlands. So there's already a project going on around re-wetting the moorlands, and I think that gives us a double benefit. It helps to reduce flooding, but it also helps to encourage that carbon sink. So here locally in this constituency, the major carbon sinks are within the moorlands and the estuary, and we should be doing everything we can to nurture those environments, as well as thinking about what we can do in terms of planting schemes.
Right, but specifically to support smallholders and other farmers that might want to change their systems.
Definitely, we are looking at how you change the way that the farming subsidy system works, so that we're valuing and rewarding farmers for the work that they're doing. And I think as well, part of the things you can do with the Citizens' Assembly is focus on some of the positives, because if we get into a debate about what people can't do anymore, it becomes very negative. If we focus it on it being about health and well-being, clean air, mental health, all those things, and how working as a dual goal, not only to get us to net zero, but to make sure that that feels to people and communities like it was a positive thing, not just framed in terms of what they have to stop doing, but how much better their lives could be. So I think that can all tie in together, is my view.
There's a question.
Helen was on strike, hunger strike earlier in the week.
I managed 3 days.
Congratulations. I wouldn't have managed 3 days.
I'm glad that you come to talk to us. Bearing in mind the deep and wide connections between industry and politicians, could you comment on divesting from fossil fuels?
Well, I voted to divest Parliament from fossil fuels because I think that Parliament needs to lead by example. And I think that process, as this campaign has much more widespread support, I think increasingly it will be difficult for companies to justify not only investing, but it's also around things like sponsorship deals and how companies can get free advertising, if you like, through their sponsorship. So I'd like to see more companies rejecting sponsorship from the fossil fuel industry. So I think it works in all ways, but certainly the whole thing. And the investments. The other point is about what we do with our overseas aid budget. And I think it's very worrying at the moment that so much of our overseas aid involves projects which are related to the fossil fuel industry, when in fact we should be investing in renewable technologies with that budget, because I think that's much more sustainable. And so I think there are things we can do internationally as well as at home.
I sincerely hope so.
Thank you.
John?
Hello. I don't know whether you picked up in the song at the beginning, one of the lines was make ecocide a crime.
Yes.
We have internationally recognised crimes like genocide, war crimes. When protesters in London get arrested by the police, but we're told go and protest lawfully. But when protesters go to a police station and say, but there are huge corporations destroying swathes of our environment, which will result in the deaths of millions of people, the police response is nothing to do with us, go to The Hague, talk to your MP. So would you support an act of parliament that makes ecocide a crime which the police would be obliged to
And
pursue?
it's not just happening on the big projects. I mean, there's a real example of that in this constituency where a developer went in, cut down all the trees outside Seymour Drive in Dartmouth. I don't know whether you know it. And then applied for planning permission after everything had been completely laid to waste. And I think there need to be very severe penalties for people who do that and an obligation to restore it. So, because at the moment, I think that in real terms, people get away with a lot of this kind of
There's
thing.
missing law, isn't
And,
there? And there's missing international law.
There is missing international law, and we look realistically as well at what's happening with China in the South China Sea, the devastation of entire ecosystems. I think it's a great tragedy, and there should be real penalties for that.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yes. Hello, Sarah.
Barbara. I think you'd agree that our public transport network is in disarray and chaos. We really need an effective, efficient, frequent, affordable public transport network, and clean, of course, in terms of emissions and pollution for our country. Do you have any thoughts on how that might be achieved?
Well, I think first of all, by having a clear commitment that we're going to get away from using petrol and diesel, and ground transport is really important. And I think if we take a polluter pays principle to this, but that people can see that every penny you raise from that is being invested in the alternative. So I think it's about applying that principle, but in a way that then directly benefits people, so that there is a choice there. Because at the moment, there isn't a choice. We all know that there isn't a choice of
People
buses.
choose cars.
And so you can also make public transport more attractive by knowing when it's going to arrive. So employing technology so you're not waiting at a bus stop 3/4 of an hour for a bus you know will never arrive. So real-time tracking technologies shouldn't just be available in cities. They're even more important for rural areas, so that people can reliably know that some transport is coming. So being much more adaptable in terms of what we can get, but how we shift resource from those who are responsible for the pollution to those who are choosing a different lifestyle. And so to me, that's about also having that investment in recharging points, because at the moment, if you buy an electric car in Devon, the chances are you might not find anywhere to recharge it, or it'll be full. So we need to have a rapid upgrade and expansion in rapid charging technology.
And specifically in your manifesto?
Yes, definitely that is there, about that shift towards this. And also, as I say, really encouraging to have 10% to be on cycling and walking. It's transforming.
I've got the impression we could all carry on talking here for
right.
a long time.
Yes.
But to be fair to the Labour Party who
Yes.
met us yesterday, about the same amount of time.
Yes.
And we have to be even-handed, as you know,
Absolutely.
we're beyond politics.
Yes.
So thank you, Sarah, very, very much
Thank
for coming
you.
and meeting us. And Stefan.
Thank you, Stefan.
And
You're welcome.
Stefan's show is just this. Is
I'm
what
showing you
Labour-
this. This is what Labour gave us yesterday.
Can you give us something similar, and we will publish them both?
Well, I can certainly send you something similar. If you don't mind, what I'd like to do is actually go away and write it and,
Thank you.
and get
Yeah,
it
yeah,
back
yeah.
to you. So
And then we will publish
I will.
it
Yes.
alongside at the same time.
Super. Thank
That's
you
what
very
Labour
much.